one of the things I've noticed about my home country, it's really stark in Canada. If conservatives protest, they're flattened.
Yeah.
Left protest, there's no holds barred. No matter how pathological it becomes, the left-wing protesters are always the heroic victims. The trucker convoy was a great example of that, right? Because, it was a disruptive demonstration, although remarkably peaceful. And the legal repercussions are still unrolling. And I think maybe tell me what you think about this. I think it's because it might be partly the spread of the ideas of Marcuse through the culture.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I also think that people are genuinely people. There's something to genuinely fear when actual conservatives protest, because they don't do it until they're pushed to the wall.
There may be, but I think
is it also an indication that something very fundamental has gone sideways? Because conservatives aren't the protesting type.
No, but I think that the trucker protest tells us something different, because the target, these people, this is one of the most genuinely peaceful, pro-liberty, free. It was the freedom convoy, and they meant it. And they policed their own borders, and they kept the radicals out on the right. So what happened was they showed up, the left showed up to protest the normal people. I'm not going to say the middle, the normal people. Everyday freedom-loving Canadians. And the excuse was there's a far right.
Yeah.
Okay. So what happened is I call this ideological flattening or dialectical flattening, but it's psychologically it's splitting. The person that's occupying the leftist deranged position has flattened liberals and conservatives into a single monster.
Yeah.
Not so they can fight the conservatives, so they can fight the liberals. And that's happening on the other side. Conservatives will look over and say, well, there's the far left, and all the classical liberals are actually in their camp. And they've flattened them. It's the same splitting behavior. And again, so this is, again, an emphasis of this woke, or an exhibition of this woke right phenomenon of same energy, different direction, opposite directions in this case. And the idea is that they are attacking the middle through the proxy of the far opposite side. So I brought up Marcuse because he's also famous for Eros and civilization and the sexual liberation. And we were talking about the pride and the queer theory.
Well, those left-wing movements in the 60s all floated on a cloud of free love.
That's right, they did. But look at the Pride Parade. Okay, so we need representation and visibility for gay people because there's a repressive society. That's the excuse. It's the far right that won't let anybody come out. So they come out. And is that where it stays? Is that what they're actually targeting? No. You have fetishes. You have all kinds of perversion, degeneracy. I mean, I don't want to even talk about what it is, explicitly, which is an advantage to queer theories. Nobody will say what it actually says. Yeah, because it's so gross.
Yeah.
But what they were targeting were liberal societal norms, real societal norms, healthy, let's forget liberal, healthy, not degenerate societal norms about sex and sexuality. And the excuse was
degenerate's the right word too, I think, because I think one of the hallmarks, because if you are a relativist, you might say, well, who are you to place modes of orienting yourself in the world in a hierarchy?
No,
right?
sure.
Because you described some of them as degenerate. The reason that they're degenerate is because when they're employed, they degenerate.
Yeah, sure, of course.
So they're games that violate their own principles as they play themselves out.
But there's nothing about a guy in fetish gear at a parade in front of children, for example, that's challenging the norms of a repressive sexual society that thinks that, it should be procreative, heterosexual sex only. That's an excuse. It's pretext. What they're after is the norms that hold regular society together. And my argument is that the woke right does the same thing. They have a cult of transgression too. They sometimes call it being based, but that's a completely bad word for what they're trying to describe, because based should mean based in reality, although the origin of the term is slang for being free-based on cocaine. So they're out of their minds, right? It's just funny how this lines up. But what do? Okay, so the left has told us, the far left has told us, you can't be racist. Racist is worse. Everybody's a racist. And of course, they completely made degenerate the concept of racism, the word racism, the accusation, the sky is racist, going for a hike is racist. But they aren't trying to reclaim and say, okay, no, wait. Racism's bad. We don't want to be racist. And nobody should be racist. And the left completely ruined it. So we need to reclaim the term and have this healthy societal norm about discrimination and bigotry. What they're doing instead is saying it's time for us to be a little bit racist. The left said, don't be racist, so we're going to be really racist. And we're going to do it in order to to own the libs, as they sometimes phrase the thing, right? But really it's to reject woke culture's the pretext. They're not acting racist or blaming Jews for everything going wrong in society, or, getting further and further into the racial expression or the white racial consciousness or whatever, or the white supremacy or even white nationalism in order to challenge the left.
No.
They're doing it to challenge the center, the healthy core of society and its norms.
Well,
that's the target. It's a cult of transgression, but they point in opposite directions. Left, in some sense, says don't be racist. They say do be racist. And this is, again, the communist fascist thing. We're going to liberate everybody. That's what the communists say. They come along. It screws everything up. And, there's all this oppression in society. We're going to liberate people from oppression and everything's going to be utopia. That's Marcuse in a nutshell. Okay?
Defined primarily by full sexual liberation.
Of course.
Right?
And
there is...
Hold on. It all goes to hell. And so then the right wakes up, woke, and says, actually, I think the oppression's what was holding us together, so we should do more of it. And they create a hierarchy in society that's very rigid, again, with that Führer principle from the fascists. Because Mussolini had his lighter version of it. Hitler concretized it for Nazi Germany in 1933, following Carl Schmitt's book, The Legal Basis for the Total State. They created the legal structure for this thing. But the idea was that there is a hierarchy that kept society on the rails, and we're going to go back to that hierarchy in extreme pastiche form. And there's a reward structure socially for the people in the club to push the envelope and attack those normal, everyday societal norms in the center. So again, same energy, opposite direction. But the point is the transgression, which they call queering on the left. We don't have a word for it on the right. They call it being based, but that's not the same as transgress. But it's still transgression. And so same pathology for different reasons, same idea, like Marx said, you go all the way back to the state of nature, you're going to combine it with the end, so you're going to become the man, the alpha man who's also the omega man, in other words, the alpha and the omega of humanity. So you become God man, Homo Deus, as Harari named it in his book, Homo Deus. And then on the right, they don't go that far back. They don't go back to the state of nature. They're not interested in the state of nature. They're interested in the mythic past from which they've been dispossessed that never existed, a romantic vision of who they were at some golden era in the past that they've been ejected from. But they're still now the alienated outsider. They're still the alien force came in, dispossessed them from who they are, and now they're going to claim it back. And the way they're going to do it is by organizing a fascist structure as an answer to the degeneracy, a very rigid structure, and in a too rigid structure, an answer to the not rigid enough structure of communism. And then what they do is the exact same transgression against the center to build their own power out in their local little cult against the big game of society. They're attacking the game of society to build their numbers with the hope of being able to replace it in both cases. So this is why I call these people woke. It's not just that they've gone on cancel rampages and struggle sessions. It's not that they've put me through a relentless struggle session since September without stopping, or, doxed my family and everything else in their wrath. I said, James calls them all woke right, and they decide to prove me wrong by canceling me and struggling me and doxing my family and acting exactly like we all went through in 2015 when you stood up about the pronouns. And that's the thing, Jordan, back then, you stood up and you paid. That was ugly. And you were right. You saw that when they said you will use these literally transgressive pronouns.
Or else.
You said no. And it's like the world lost its mind on you. And it's, looking back, it's almost quaint, but it wasn't quaint to go through. But the thing is you were right. And then Peter and Helen and I did the grievance studies papers, and we were right. So we were right. And I see the same structures, the same patterns, the same behaviors, the same reactions, the same explanations with slight modifications. That's the difference between communism and fascism as modern archetypes. And what I see when you can think of those as modern era mythologies for how society is supposed to be organized. And I see the same thing. And the thing is, we were right then and we're right now.